What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. We got the three-headed goat back at it again. I know you guys are going to be very sad when this doesn't happen every single podcast because of the insight Jimmy and Chris bring, but we got Chris to get back on the podcast, as he will more than likely be on all the time. But this time, Chris is in Florida with the Cavs, IMG Academy. That's my first question, my friend. How is the campus?
It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't know any other way to say it. Like, it is obnoxiously awesome. It is so big. It is so vast. It's so big that I didn't know which direction to type into my Lyft earlier today from my hotel, because they have an East campus and they have a West campus. And I just guessed. I went west. That was incorrect. The West campus is where the hotel is, where all the lodging is, where the football field is. So then I went to the East campus, which was probably like 4 blocks away, to try and give you an idea about how big this campus is. Everything is gated. They've got security waiting for you at every single entrance. There are so many signs. And then the room that we were in, because they have this facility, which is basically a basketball facility and a tennis facility. Inside that facility, they've got all these pictures and all these jerseys, either of NBA players that have gone through IMG Academy or tennis players that have also gone through there. And it is a who's who. I mean, if you think about the tennis Hall of Fame that they have just plastered right in the middle of this beautiful building, Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi, Maria Sharapova, the Williams sisters. It's crazy to think about the people that came through that program and went on to do what they're currently doing right now, or went on to be so successful in the endeavor that they were in. I understand why it is so expensive to go there. I understand why it's so exclusive. It is a really, really cool campus, but it is massive. It is bigger. I mean, it's got to be bigger than my college. I went to Baldwin-Wallace, Division III. It's got to be bigger than Baldwin-Wallace. It has to be.
All right. So that... Well, I know a lot of our listeners are like fans of where you eat at and all that, but like on the scale of where this ranks of the facilities that you have been to throughout your career, that the Cavs have gone to, like they were in Houston like last year, where does this rank at for the places that you've been?
Well, it's better than Baruch College in Manhattan, I can tell you that much. It's probably a little bit better than Basketball City in the Brooklyn area. I mean, it's one of the best, nicest, biggest places that they go to that's not an actual NBA facility. There are 4 basketball courts. There's a bunch of training rooms right nearby. There's a bunch of meeting rooms. They catered food there as well. So in terms of the non-NBA places where they practice, where they hold shoot-arounds, whatever the case may be, it is the best. It is the nicest one that I have been to. It's a far cry from the Las Vegas high school that they were in for Las Vegas Summer League that had like 1.5 courts.
I mean, you can compare it to the pavilion that they were playing in, the Cox Pavilion. I bet. I mean, for Summer League itself, that's a comparison I would say. I mean, it's just, I've just heard stories, and I know you're down there now. I had to get your thoughts on it before we get into everything else.
Honestly, I could not believe how big and vast it was. I mean, it felt like the 8 surrounding roads or so, main roads leading to this place, were all IMG Academy in some capacity. Whether it was the building for basketball and tennis, whether it was the football field, whether it was the beautiful hotel that is on those grounds, whether it was one of the restaurants that was attached to the place, whether it was the housing, the condos that it looked like some IMG people were coming out of. Yeah, it had to be like 8 to 10 different streets that this thing covered, just right in the middle of Bradenton, right off one of the main roads.
For those listening, worth a quick Google, because now as Chris is talking, I got curious. It's basically just a resort. It looks like a resort to me based on the Google images.
I mean, the people that work there have to go around in a golf cart. Nobody was walking. Everybody has their own golf cart. In fact, like right by the basketball facility, there are individual parking spots that are reserved only for golf carts.
Jimmy, I wanted to kind of compare this to Ohio University with you for a second. I mean, could you imagine having a golf cart going up the red brick roads of Athens, Ohio's campus, man? Like, that would have saved us a couple of trips, but I probably wouldn't have been in the shape that I was in.
No, that's trouble. No golf carts on Court Street. That's a bad recipe.
The pasture that is Ohio University. I spent time there. My cousin went there. So I spent a number of weekends there when
everybody's got a cousin. Everybody's got a cousin that way.
Everybody's got an OU story. That's for sure. That's for sure. But we want to get into the stories of this Cavs team, obviously. And it just feels like we got to talk to Kenny Atkinson, Caris LeVert, Jared Allen today after first camp. Chris, I know practice ran a little long, so you might have got to see some things that you might not have seen if it was on time. What do you think about the defensive identity that Kenny Atkinson is trying to continue from last year? Obviously, we know Kenny Atkinson to be a big offensive-minded guy, but he didn't want to change that of the team and what they are known for on the defensive end. He's just building on it, right?
I asked Jared Allen point blank. I said, hey, look, like you guys focus so much of your attention on defense today, and that's what Kenny said. And he wants this to be a defense first team. Is that something that you remember of Kenny back in his Brooklyn days, or is that new to Cleveland in part because of the personnel that is already here, in part because of the success that you guys have had? Like when Kenny was there, did you consider him a defensive minded coach or an offensive minded coach? And like the way that he said it, I want to quote him correctly because it was the most Jarrett response to this question that it could be. Like he didn't want to basically say, no, he didn't really focus on defense at all when I was in Brooklyn. He said, I mean, it's always been an area that wasn't the main focus, I would say. but Jarrett went on to say it's the identity of this team, and anybody that would come to this team with Evan Mobley, with Jared Allen, with 3 straight top 10 defenses in the NBA, like anybody that would come to this team and try and drastically change the defense or turn this into some kind of like offensive juggernaut, some running gun, some 7 seconds or less type team is not playing to the strength of the personnel. That would be foolish to do. And Kenny Atkinson basically said that. He said, this is not a complete makeover that I'm inheriting here. I think everybody would admit that of all the available jobs, maybe apart from Phoenix this offseason, which was earmarked for one guy and one guy only, of all the available jobs this offseason, the Cavs, it was the most appealing. It's ready to win now. It's got a young roster that is under team control, and you have a general idea of who's going to be around for the foreseeable future. There's a star player who happens to be top 10, top 15 in the NBA, and there's a foundation for success in place. And the foundation for success for the Cavs over the last 3 years, guys, compiling 143 wins in the regular season and advancing to the playoffs 2 years in a row, it's been about defense. So Kenny doesn't want to lose that just because he wants to make these tweaks and he wants to make the offense more creative, more dynamic, and more explosive. And I don't blame him for that.
Yeah, the difference between Kenny and Brooklyn taking that, like he was basically building from the studs over there. And so when you're doing that, you kind of start with what you know, and Kenny knows he's the offensive expert, right? So he's also described himself as as a guards coach. So if what you know is offense, you want to make your guards feel comfortable, show what you know. Show what you know. Build offense. That's what those Brooklyn Nets teams tried to be. There were obviously some talent limitations there, no disrespect to those rosters, but that's the difference between trying to build a foundation and trying to build off of a foundation that's already been set, right? The other thing is, Chris said it perfectly. It's very intentional that this happened on the first day, right? Because I think so much swirling around about what's going to be different with the offense, and let's get so excited we're going to shoot a bunch of threes, and it would set probably the wrong kind of tone if you just came out and neglected defense on the first day of practice, when that's how your bread has been buttered the last couple of years. All that stuff is going to come, the implementation of the new offense, the philosophy of more pace and space, all of that will come. But it's like, don't forget what got you here. Let's remember who we are a little bit.
And just because Chris mentioned him, we mentioned talking to him a little bit today, to clear up the rumors that were swirling during the summer. Jared Allen's hair is still intact. The afro is very much still an afro.
I told everybody that. I saw it in Summer League. Nobody wanted to believe me.
Man, they were questioning your sources, Chris. Maybe because your barber might be a little different than his. That might be why they trust your calf sources, but the hairstyle sources, those might be a little bit different.
In this case, my sources were my own two eyes interacting with him and seeing him work out at one of those little high schools that I was talking about in Las Vegas. It was so weird that people were like, I don't know. I'm seeing something different than you. It's like I was standing 2 feet from him. Like, it's okay. Like, he does this every single summer. And yes, it was very much afro-y. In fact, I think people on this roster and in this organization would be baffled and maybe a little bit worried if Jarrett got rid of the fro and didn't do the quirky things that he does and showed up in a different pair of shoes and didn't have his high socks and the headband and stuff. At that point, I think people would start to get worried about Jarrett, because the one thing you know about him is he is very much comfortably himself, and he's not going to change that. And synonymous with Jared Allen is that signature afro.
Yeah, we don't need any quarter life crises from Jared Allen right now. And isn't it so perfect? That's like the perfect encapsulation of like how people consume media these days. Chris is over here is like, hey, I saw him. He's got the afro. People are like, I don't know. I'm not so sure.
I don't know, bud. I don't know.
I just remember being on social media and like there's a podcast dedicated to Jared Allen's afro, and that Twitter account, or X account, formerly known as Twitter, was freaking out for the betterment of like, since the news came out, they saw the picture of his media day. Were like, okay, finally we can relax. Like, we haven't seen him the entire summer, but I just think that was an entirely funny just occurrence, and we had to clear it up for everybody that might have still had their doubts out there. But the other main thing that Kenny Atkinson was talking about today when it came to the offense, when it came to this team, included Jared Allen, but also his running mate in the front court, Evan Mobley, and how he wanted them to interact and be able to kind of give some insight on how to fix the too big situation, as he called it, right? And the way that they worked on it and the way that they said they worked on it in the first day of training camp was that Evan was still orchestrating offenses. He was at the top of the key with the ball, and he had players setting screens for him rather than setting screens of his own. I think it was a really interesting concept, but also not foreign to an offense that we might be seeing in the future. Chris, what did you think about this entire thing that Kenny Atkinson kind of alluded to after day one?
Guys, I don't know how this is going to unfold, because all of this makes a lot of sense to talk about right now in the offseason, going into training camp, going into the regular season, before any meaningful game gets played. It all makes sense to talk about Evan Mobley as a playmaker, Evan Mobley out on the perimeter, Evan Mobley away from the dunker spot, so him and Jared aren't trying to still occupy the same dunker spot or clog the paint together. All of the complications stylistically that can come and have come in the past with Jared and Evan on the floor together remedying those things and finding a coach who has a plan to make those things a little bit more viable is very, very logical. And it makes sense that Kenny is looking at it this kind of way. In saying that, I just think it's going to be hard. This is not a developmental team. Like, yes, player development is very, very important to the success of this organization. It's very, very important to this organization taking the next step. But player development is not going to come at the expense of wins. It's just not. They're not in that situation right now. The minute that they traded for Donovan Mitchell a couple of years ago, they accelerated their timeline. They became a win-now team. And it wasn't solely about the development of Isaac Okoro and Darius Garland and Evan Mobley and dealing with the growing pains that are going to come with that. The question that I have, and this is going to unfold as we continue to get into the regular season, and then we get into December, and then we get into March, and then we finally get into the playoffs. How much of an appetite does Kenny Atkinson have, and how much of an appetite do the players have to give Evan Mobley the runway and the leeway to go through some of the growing pains on court in meaningful games against high-level competition where the offense may suffer? The team, its record may suffer because he's trying to figure it out, right? Because it's not a natural thing. How they're planning to use Evan Mobley is not the way that he has been used since coming into the NBA. It's not the way that he was used at USC when he was in college. It's not a natural thing. He is still most comfortable around the rim, in the paint, at the elbow, in the dunker spot, because that's how he's been used his entire life. So I just wonder when, the meaningful games start coming, and we've talked about how it's going to be really, really difficult in the Eastern Conference and how loaded the Eastern Conference. How much of an appetite is there to give Evan Mobley this kind of space that he probably needs to get more comfortable in this kind of role and playing this kind of offensive style? And I do not know the answer to that question. The only thing I continue to go back to is when Donovan came here, all of that went out the window. And Evan hasn't, for all the things that we can say about Evan, like, he hasn't gotten the space that usually top 3 draft picks do. He hasn't gotten the opportunities. He hasn't gotten the touches. He hasn't gotten the usage rate. He hasn't gotten the shot attempts, because this team that he is on, and the one that it quickly morphed into shortly after he arrived, is not, what it usually is for a top 3 draft pick.
It's not just like I agree with Chris that it's not the Eastern Conference. You may have to win 50 games to stay out of the play-in tournament. We talked about that on the last pod. But the Cavs should be, it's not just about top 6. Obviously, no one wants to be in the play-in tournament. The Cavs should be gunning for that 2-3 line. Everyone should be trying to avoid Boston. I think the Cavs are actually uniquely positioned to do that because some of the other teams around them, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, are old. The Cavs are not old. It would be like, if you're Philadelphia, Ethan and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, your entire season should be built around get Joel Embiid and Paul George healthy to the playoffs. Mm-hmm. Milwaukee, the Giannis stuff's been kind of freakish, and he's actually been pretty durable for most of his career, but 34, 35-year-old Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton's been very fragile the last couple of years. Get those guys to the playoffs and figure it out from there. There's an opportunity for the Cavs to go in there if they send it and maximize their regular season ceiling to capitalize on that, get home court advantage, and avoid Boston toward the Western Conference Finals. It's not easy to do that and bring Evan Mobley along the way you want him to do, because it will. I guess I don't know this, but I'm pretty sure it will hurt your regular season ceiling to funnel possessions toward Evan Mobley instead of Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. That's just common sense, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It may be necessary for his long-term growth, but it's just like you're threading a really tight needle here. And I asked Evan, to Chris's point about, what's in his DNA. I asked Evan at Media Day. By the way, I was reminded again at Media Day how shy and not assertive Evan Mobley is. He's grumbling into the mic. That's fine. You're a great player.
California chill. California laid back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I asked him, like, kind of almost jokingly, how many coaches have been telling you to shoot more shots your entire life? I'm sure that we talk about it all the time. He was basically like, yeah, but they've also been praising me for being a smart player. So, like,
Right.
Evan Mobley has existed. He's gotten very comfortable existing this way, taking the points that are handed to him, picking his spots very carefully, and it's worked his entire life. And he's been praised for it his entire life. He's carved out an identity in the NBA, earned a max rookie extension this way. So it's we talked about it before. It's not just okay, Evan. Here are the opportunities. Evan has to take advantage of those
Mhm.
opportunities, and even then, what happens? I don't know.
Yeah, because we talked to Kenny today, like I've been saying, and Kenny Atkinson talked about taking Evan out of the dunker spot, and it felt like to me that this is going to be the year that they're going to attempt to turn Evan Mobley into a true stretch five or a stretch four. And my bad, already thinking ahead, but a true stretch four is something that would be able to counter some of these other teams that we're talking about in the league that we eventually expect them to see. And especially when you talk about the future of this team, Evan Mobley's gonna need to be able to have some of these aspects of his game unless he's in the full time five possession, right? Because if he's going up against the Boston Celtics, against the New York Knicks, guys that have people that are smaller, faster, better shooters, being able to spread. Obviously, Evan Mobley is a capable defender, but how is he going to be able to challenge defenders on the perimeter? Is he going to be able to do those kinds of things that impact winning at multiple different levels for the Cavs, not only this year, but for the future? And I think both of you are asking an important question when it comes to the development of this team now, right? Is it going to be the year that they take a risk and say, we want you to become that stretch four, rather than being like, okay, we'll do what Jimmy says, let's go get those 50 wins and be wherever in the standings, right? And ESPN even came out with a ranking for their win totals for this season. I think they had the Cavs in second in the Eastern Conference with 50.6. So, like, Jimmy's notion of them being second is correct. It's just how did they get there? Is that the mentality and the mindset that they're going to have going into the year? I just think it's really interesting the two very different sides of this that could play out for the season.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm curious to see again how Kenny is going to handle the dynamic between the two guys. Because there's the other side of this too, guys. Um, in basketball, when developing your offense and putting your system in place, it's about trying to create as many advantages as you possibly can. And one of the advantages that the Cavs do have, and one of the advantages that they have had, as wonky as it can look at times offensively, is very few teams have two guys like that, right? Two guys that are both 7 feet, that can play make a little bit, that can shoot a little bit, that can finish around the rim, that are nimble, that are agile, that at times can play out on the perimeter. So you have to continue to take advantage of the fact that you do have Evan Mobley and Jared Allen on the floor together, and that creates problems for the opposing team. They're not able to do some of the things lineup wise that they may want to do. It may force a team to say, hey, we're not going to downsize. We're not going to play small. We're going to try and counter that and play a little bit bigger. But the guy that they put out there so that they can play bigger is not as good as what it would be for that team if they were to play small. And it's not as good as it is for the Cavs to play two bigs together. So all of that kind of stuff, it feels like to me, Kenny is fully aware of. But I think he's still looking. He has a plan in place. It's a detailed plan in place. It's one that he has not revealed yet to anybody except for President of Basketball Operations Kobe Altman, Mike Gansey, and other people that he interviewed with during the coaching process. But even though he has a detailed plan in place, there's no way for him to know for sure if it's going to work until he actually tries it, right? He can't just go into this saying, yes, it's going to work no matter what. And he can't go into this saying, no, those two guys can't possibly work together. You try it. You see what works, you see what doesn't, and you make adjustments based on that. But it does feel to me that he is very, very committed to the two big front because he sees the advantages that the Cavs can have with those guys together, and because it feels like he believes greatly in the skill set of Evan Mobley and what he can possibly become in this offense that Kenny sees.
It kind of behooves him to think that way, though,
Of
right?
course
Like
it does.
we talked,
Yes.
we talked a lot yesterday about the Cavs continuity being their calling card. What were their other options? Kenny Atkinson presents a plan to Cope. By the way, Kenny Atkinson trying to get a job. We've all tried to get a job before. What do you tell the interviewer? What the interviewer wants to hear.
That's
So Kenny Atkinson comes into Kobe Altman's office and says, "Hey, man, I think we can make this thing work with two bigs. I think we can maintain this great defensive foundation we've built here, which is largely based on the fact that you have two elite rim protectors on the court sometimes, and at least one on the court at all times, and we can still unlock some new creases in this offense." Well, that seems like a really hard thing to do, Kenny, but if you think we can do it, all right, I'll give you a chance. Here's the job. We're in the job interview. We're in like the honeymoon phase. We're in the job interview phase where we're speaking about the ideals and like what could be. We're going to find out in about a month here what is. And the other thing here is like I'm not sure that Kenny can execute the vision that he has for this offense and maintains the wrong word. Keep the same level of defensive identity that the Cavs have. Like this is the crux of the whole thing that the Cavs have going right now. Two bigs on the court, good for defense. Two bigs on the court, bad for offense. I don't really know that that's going to change. I'm open to it. I trust that Kenny has stuff that he wants to try. I'm intrigued by the idea of Evan and Jarrett being more active without the ball, screening all the time and seeing what that looks like. I'm intrigued by it. But again, at a certain point, they will come to a rest and there will be two big men on the court that the other team doesn't have to defend on the perimeter. So, yeah.
To take that a step further, too, in terms of style offensively, Kenny touched on this today. Playing faster is great. It's something that I think plays into the hands of a lot of the players on this roster, and I think the players are really, really excited about that possibility. That means more possessions. That means a different kind of floor balance. That means a little bit more pressure on your defense and your transition defense. So it's about finding that balance, right? You do want to play faster, but you also don't want to give up what it may cost you on the defensive end of the floor.
Chris had a line in his story today. Who does Kenny Atkinson think he is? JB Bickerstaff? And when you just said that just now, Chris, I imagine Kenny whirling his arm around like a windmill after rebounds like JB did last year. It's a good option. Run fast, play fast. You have two really agile big men. Both of them can run the floor. You don't have to. These are not your Joel Embiids. You have to kind of wait for the big man to come up the court and naturally use him as a trailer because he's not fast enough to keep up with your guards. These guys can go do that. But again, to your point, there's a ripple effect for everything.
That partially brings me back to my point that I made a couple podcasts ago when I was referencing the Miami Heat's offense when LeBron James, D Wade, and Chris Bosh were on the team, and they kind of cut off the box to box on a baseline, basically, for when they had their offense running in transition. They said no big men are able to go through this area. You got to be spread out and allow people to, like Jared Allen was talking about during media day, either get to the corners or get out of the way so that people who are going to be in transition up the floor get open shots and get open looks easier rather than clogging up space when you're running down that big little side. And it was like, okay, but now it's talking about the future, right? We're talking about this team that re-signed, extended, multiple players that they feel like they want to have here, allegedly contract-based for the next few years, right? The same thing happened for a lot of these teams in the Eastern Conference, and they got better. right? The Boston Celtics extended, re-signed, got a lot of the same players from their championship run last year, and now the New York Knicks also made a move to be able to grow their offense, but also grow their size when it comes to the players that they have on their roster. Obviously, Karl Anthony Towns is the player that I'm talking about and how they're going to be able to run a 5-out lineup from the jump, especially with Mitchell Robinson being out to start the season. So I wanted to get your first just your overview of the new New York Knicks lineup, what they did to get there, how all the trades and all the pieces and the 3-team deal and all those different things allowed it to look more so like the Knicks are going to be able to have this team for at least 4 years, depending on what they do with contracts and salaries and things of that nature. But I wanted to look at their depth chart based on ESPN currently after the trade, right? Jalen Brunson at point guard, Mikal Bridges at shooting guard, OG Anunoby at small forward, 6'4" power forward Josh Hart, and center Karl Anthony Towns. So this is a team that feels like a lot of teams are building to beat the Boston Celtics, right? How do you feel like this team is organized? How do you feel like this team is going to be hard to combat when it comes to a Cavs lineup that has two bigs, or how that could be an advantage for the Cavs?
I think this new looks Knick team is good. I think it's better. I think it's got more of a ceiling, especially on the offensive end. But it's going to be different. They're choosing willingly to play a different style, to use different personnel, and to go away from some of the things that have been successful for them recently. Isaiah Hartenstein is a big loss for the Knicks. Mitchell Robinson not playing as many minutes because Cat is going to be out there, or maybe they're going to play them together. Who knows how they're going to make it work? But that's a difference for them because what they were, and they're probably still going to be elite defensively. Bridges is really, really good. OG Anunoby, really, really good. Cat can be at times when he's engaged. Josh Hart is one of the most impactful players, regardless of position in the NBA. He just finds a way to do a lot of different things that contribute to winning, and he's always been like that, even going back to college. And they've got Tibbs, right? So he's not going to let them slip as much defensively. But the places where they were elite, I don't know that they're still going to be. They're an elite defensive rebounding team in the past, and that got them a bunch of extra possessions. And that was very problematic for the Cavs. They had a hard time dealing with the Knicks' overall physicality. Julius Randle was a part of that, right? Mitchell Robinson was a part of that. Isaiah Hartenstein was a part of that. So that particular strength that I feel like New York had over a lot of teams, I don't know that it still exists. At the same time, the Brunson Cat pick and pop stuff is going to be really difficult to guard. And now with Cat out there drawing attention and pulling defenders away from the rim and making things easier for Jalen Brunson, you just wonder what next step exists for Brunson, who is already just so great, so impactful, so dynamic, and takes his game to a different level on the biggest stages. So I do think they are better. I do think they have a different kind of ceiling offensively, but I think they're different. And I think it's going to take them some time to try and work through all of the changes that they've made to a roster. It was pretty good to begin with, but I understand if you're trying to compete with Boston and it's about championships and you've got pretty much your core in place, now's the time to strike and try and find what you believe to be the missing piece. And Cat plays a completely different style than Julius Randle and the other bigs that were already on that roster. And if they get good Cat, right, all-star Cat, they're going to be a problem in the Eastern Conference. They were already going to be a problem in the East. Now they're going to be, to me, even more of a problem, provided they keep their same defensive intensity and focus.
Yeah, I think this is a natural evolution for them. I think Julius Randle was a player who was really important to an older version of this team. I mean, even before Brunson got there, he was their number one guy. That year they lost to the Hawks in the playoffs. He was, I mean, and by the way, Julius Randle, not a great playoff performer. He's been injured, obviously, but not a great playoff performer in his time in New York. But he was, I don't know, he was like the
He
Knicks
was the start of
JB
their renaissance.
Yes, and I think he was the Knicks JB Bickerstaff, and Cat might be the Kenny Atkinson a little bit, where like Julius Randle, you served a purpose. You helped us get out of the dark, and New York should actually, give him. I hope the Knicks fans give him a good ovation when he first comes back, because he really did a lot for that franchise to get them out. But Cat's a real kind of playoff potential offensive star. Julius, like Cat is such a better complement to Jalen Brunson. Julius just likes having the ball a little bit too much. He's not as reliable a 3-point shooter. Cat can get you 25 points. You don't even really have to run a play for him. You're going to run a lot of pick and pop for him, and you're going to want to throw him the ball. Like Cat, you remember, people forget Cat at Kentucky was absolutely eating people on the low blocks with dream shakes and all that kind of stuff. It has a beautiful feathery jump hook, so you can run your offense through him. But you can also just for the Cavs purposes, Cat's a really important player, because now Evan Mobley or Jared Allen, you can't help off that guy. That's one. If you only have one rim protector, that's a really interesting problem that you're presenting to teams, because Cat is a guy that you have to stay with on the perimeter. So you either are taking your big man away from the rim, or you're putting a smaller guy on him and inviting the Knicks to post him up. I will lament I don't want to call it the death, but the decline of Knicks bully ball a little bit, with Julius out the door, Isaiah Hartenstein out the door. But part of Knicks bully ball was that they were throwing a lot of knuckleballs up there to begin with. You know what I mean? So with Cat on the court, with Mikal Bridges on the court, I think they'll miss Dante DiVincenzo a ton, not just because he's one of the Nova Knicks guys, and that's a key part of their chemistry. Obviously, Bridges played at Villanova too. Bridges is kind of just like a taller, better defensive version of Dante, but maybe not quite the high volume 3-point
not as good,
marksman that Dante was, but still a good shooter. Still, I mean, like an elite, maybe the prototypical 3-and-D type of wing in this league. So I love it for them. But honestly, when I think about this through a Cavs lens, we might be back with the two big lineups. You know what I mean? Because like now, okay, whether it's Jared Allen or Evan Mobley, one of you guys have to account for Cat. We still got another guy who could protect the rim behind us. Jalen Brunson. The idea of this is Jalen Brunson, as fun as it is to watch him pivot 6-7 times a possession at the elbow, like he won't have to do that as much, because he won't have to pick up his dribble, because there won't be anyone in the way at the rim. He can just finish layups. But Josh Hart's still going to be out there. That's a guy I think people will help off. Or OG Anunoby has improved greatly as a shooter in this league, but in certain lineups, I think that's a guy you might want to help off of. So the Cavs, particularly for the Knicks matchup, this sort of softens that advantage that the Knicks had of them over offensive rebounding, right?
Yep.
And the Cavs have a built-in counter to this Cat thing, where it's like, okay, yeah, we do have to dedicate one of our guys to guarding Cat out there on the perimeter, but we got another one.
Yep. I definitely think the Cavs match up better with the Knicks these days than they did in the past. Like, that was the Cavs' boogeyman. Like, nobody wanted to see the Knicks in the playoff series. And when the Cavs did see the Knicks in the playoff series, everybody understood why the Cavs felt that way. And I think even going into last year, there was a belief of not the Knicks again. But now I just don't think there would be or should be that same feeling for the Cavs, even though, it's weird to say this because the Knicks added the best big man shooter of the last decade. I'm not sure that I'm missing somebody. Kevin Love's certainly in that conversation too, but he's not Cat. Cat's to a different level. I don't think I'm missing anybody. I think he's the best big man shooter of the last decade, and that just gives any kind of offense a different dimension, especially one that is run by Jalen Brunson, who
we would be remiss though if we didn't also mention that Karl Anthony Towns is one of the most ridiculous basketball players when it comes to managing his emotions, particularly in the playoffs. Yeah. Yes, foul prone is how it manifests itself. But I think it all is just rooted from he has not proven himself to be ready to rise to those big stage, bright lights moments. He was good. He was good in the one of their playoff series this year, but he was still up and down. I think it was this Denver series where he was pretty good, but he was really up and down again. He's getting better at the foul stuff, but it still happens a lot. And it's just like the fouls 30 feet from the basket, or it's the stuff where he's flailing around with his limbs near like just fouling like on loose ball fouls, such dumb avoidable mistakes that he makes. And I'm not sure that's going to get better playing at Madison Square Garden with a much more aggressive media environment and just an elevated profile from him. That's a huge question that I have about this trade.
And Chris kind of ended the podcast yesterday with saying that this Cavs roster might not be the same that you have after the trade deadline, before the trade deadline. And I think the teams that we're talking about, especially this trade with the Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves, is very like it shows you that this is a business, right? Like Julius Randle was literally at the Earl Monroe New Renaissance Basketball School, raising over $1 million through his 30 for 3 program. I believe it was just a couple days before he was traded from New York. A guy that was like all for New York at baseball games, all those different things. Karl Anthony Towns, right? Cat had been with the Timberwolves for 9 years, and as soon as they get to the playoffs, as soon as he brings them or helps bring them from the ashes of what that team used to be, okay, you haven't performed in the playoffs, get out. and he was like, it was said that he was excited to come back. It was a shock that it happened. And then you talk about Dante DiVincenzo, who we haven't talked about a lot on this podcast, but he was a part of the deal, right? And he, as Jimmy said, that was the Nova Knicks for a summer, a couple of months. And then as soon as quickly as it was created, it was dismantled because the Knicks wanted to have a higher ceiling, as Chris claims it, right? And I feel that Cavs fans have to kind of get ready for what the possibilities are this season for this team and what potentially could happen, whether they like the player, whether they think he's playing well, playing poorly. It's a business. And what the Cavs believe needs to happen is more than likely going to happen. And right now, like Jimmy's been saying, this is the honeymoon phase. It might get ugly and changes might need to be made.
So the other thing is, some trades are easier to predict than others about who's going to be moved. Cat was the name that a lot of people around the NBA were keeping an eye on, and they thought that there was a chance that he was going to get moved. And then some people were like, well, look at Minnesota. They're on the rise. They had a bunch of success in the playoffs. Are they really going to do that? But he was a name that was on the radar, right? DeJounte Murray was always a name that was on the radar in the offseason that could potentially get moved. So there are names out there that teams are already monitoring to see who is that next star or close to star that is going to be on the move, that is going to be disgruntled in the situation that he's in and want a different situation for one reason or another, or a team that is supposed to be good is going to underachieve, and they're going to determine that maybe it makes more sense for them to cash in on that player, go into a state of rebuild, recoup some assets. This new setup that the NBA has that has created a bunch of parity, it's also something that teams around the NBA are very, very aware of. And some teams around the NBA are just fearful of it because they understand the team building restrictions. So like if you're a big price guy on a team that probably isn't championship level, are you going to be there? So I don't know who those names are. I can throw out some that I think could be potential ones in the next 1 to 2 years. I don't know that every single one would be a fit for the Cavs necessarily, but I think De'Aaron Fox is worth watching. I think Desmond Bane is worth watching. I think Draymond Green is worth watching. I think Brandon Ingram is another name to put on the radar. LaMelo Ball. And again, not all of these are fits for the Cavs based on their current roster construction. Zach LaVine from the Bulls, Trae Young from the Hawks, Jimmy Butler, if Miami underachieves again. You know that there's going to be movement in the NBA. And it's just a situation of who is that player, and what team is going to look to go that particular direction. And if that player becomes available or those players become available, who jumps on that opportunity? And is it another Eastern Conference team potentially that jumps on that opportunity to make it even more grueling for the Cavs throughout the course of this regular season to get one of those locked in 6 playoff spots? Because I think one thing that we can also all agree on is that, if the Cavs are not a locked in top 6 in the East, that's a tenuous spot to be in.
Yeah, that's scary hours if we get to that point. First of all, I think Brandon Ingram and Zach LaVine, they are on the radar. Their GMs are calling other teams and saying, hey, are you sure that your radar is working? Just want to double check. Because Brandon Ingram and Zach LaVine are extremely available right now. They can be had. Yeah, I mean, this trade does also reek of second apron scary. The Timberwolves took a look at their roster and said, I mean, I don't know what role their ownership upheaval played in this either, but that's certainly happening.
When you go into the luxury tax, it's fine in theory, but who's footing the bill?
Right. Certainly happening. Is it Glenn Taylor's team? Is it A-Rod's team?
Right.
Who knows? But yeah, they looked at their roster and they're like, yeah, this could get a little tight. And I think they would love for this to be a Rudy Gobert trade, I think. But that's a harder player to move. And honestly, Rudy Gobert is a foundational. We're going to talk about defensive identity. Timberwolves weren't the best defense in the league till Rudy Gobert got there. So maybe not. I don't know. But Cat is a movable piece, an attractive player that they clearly like the package they got for him. And from the Knicks side of it, I think just listen to this in the abstract. Julius Randle is a piece on that team that I think for a long time, a lot of people were like, not sure this fits. But we're going to see what happens. The Knicks had 2 runs to the second round of the playoffs, and then they got to the summer and they said, there's a good player out there. We're going to move this guy. That's comparable success to what the Cavs are having, even better. And that's a similar question that we're asking, whether it's Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell or Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. Like the Julius Randle piece of this, even the Cat part of this didn't either. Didn't come out of left field. The timing of it was surprising. But the idea that Julius Randle would get traded, I think a lot of people had that inkling. And I think we have been talking about it for a year at least now. Like it would not surprise anyone if by this time next year the core 4 is broken up, because now Kenny's tried his magic on it and it's still not working to the level that they need it to.
All right. So, Jimmy leaves you with a cliffhanger today, and that will be how we wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. If you think we're flat out wrong and want to argue with us and say that the core 4 is going to work and Kenny Atkinson's magic is going to be perfect this season, sure, shoot us a text. We'll respond to you potentially and see what we can talk about. But to do this, you got to sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast. It's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.